So in a previous class, we discussed address terms. The observation actually that address terms for men and women are different. We discussed Ms., Miss, Mrs., and Mr. So this realization, this observation, leads us to a consideration of the most fundamental difference in social categorization, which is the one based on gender. So you will actually start the chapter by giving us three different categories of gender present nowadays. The first is biological or natural gender, and this has to do with the distinction in sex between the male and female of each species. The second is grammatical gender, which we actually discussed in a previous class, and we mentioned that words in some words in Arabic, for example, like the sun or the moon, or in words, nouns for inanimate objects, actually have masculine and feminine inflections, but this is grammatical gender. This has nothing to do with biological gender. This is grammatical gender, and it has to do with the distinction between masculine and feminine. And this is used to classify nouns in languages, and we have examples from Spanish in the book, like El Sol and La Luna. The final categorization of gender is social gender, and this has to do with the distinction we make when we use words like man and woman, father and mother, boy and girl, and so on. And this is used by us as individuals, as members of a society, to classify individuals in terms of the roles they play in society. So since we discussed words like boy and girl, man and woman, father and mother. So this leads us to discussing gendered language use. So there are some differences identified between words used by men and women in a variety of languages. For example, in the language spoken in Ethiopia, there are some words used only by men and some words used only by women. So the example given in the book is the word milk would be different, would be actually pronounced differently, or men and women use different words actually altogether, not just pronounced differently, but the words are different altogether that are used by both men and women. Also, many Native American languages spoken in Montana and Louisiana are reported to have had different versions used by men and women. In Japanese, when referring to themselves, men also use boko, but women use watashi or atashi. In Portuguese, saying thank you is different if the addressee is a man or a woman, so there is a difference. So other examples that are used to talk about men and women also show us some reference to gendered language use. These examples like hero and heroine, actor or actress, suggest that the words for men are normal, but then the words for women like actress or heroine are special additions. So actually marking this type of difference has decreased in contemporary American English. So now we have firemen is replaced with firefighters, policemen is replaced with police officers, but there is still a strong tendency to treat forms for the man, his, as the normal means of reference when speaking generally. However, now alternatives that include both genders like his or her, so say each student, for example, each student is required to buy his or her own dictionary instead of saying each student is required to buy his dictionary only, so including both reference to both genders, or avoiding gendered language use altogether. So say, for example, we would say each student is required to buy their own dictionary, for example. Also, there are some other terms that are used exclusively for women, for example, like career women or a working mother. We don't find equivalent for these terms or for these um, terms for men. These terms continue the pattern of special terms for women but not men. So gendered language use does not just apply to vocabulary but also to structures. So when discussing social variation in language, we generally note some differences between working class and middle class speech, and there are actually gender differences that exist within different social classes. So, for example, it has been noted that women are more likely to use higher prestige forms than men. So the difference is most noticeable among middle class speakers. So in one study of double negatives, for example, I don't want none in lower middle class speech, it has been found that men are more likely to use double negatives than women. So the percentage for men was 32%, while it was only 1% for women who prefer to use this structure, I don't want none or negative, double negatives. So actually, this regular pattern of difference is sometimes explained in terms of women's socialization to be more aware of social status and to be more sensitive to how others may judge them. And again, an alternative explanation appeals to the socialization of men to be strong, tough, and independent. So, forms which are non standard or associated with working class speech may be preferred by men because of their association with manual work, with strength, with toughness, and tough guys also have seem to have deep voices. So speaking of deep voices, gendered language use also extends to a gendered speech. So that this has to do with pitch and intonation. So we define pitch as the effect of vibration in the vocal folds, with slower vibration making voices sound lower and rapid vibration making voices sound higher. So although normal speaking takes place with substantial overlap actually in the pitch ranges of men and women, meaning it's quite hard to identify which is which, there is a tendency to exaggerate the differences in many contexts in order to sound more like a man or more like a woman. So it has been found in one study that men typically speak in a lower pitch range than women. Among women speaking contemporary American English, there is also generally more use of pitch movement that is more rising and falling intonation. So, for example, some characteristic features of women's speech have been identified, like the use of rising intonation at the end of statements, like "It happened near San Diego in Southern California." So also the more frequent use of hedges in speaking, like I'm sort of, I'm kind of, sure, I'm sort of thinking about it, and so on. And the frequent use of tag questions, like the example, isn't it? It's kind of called in here, isn't it? To express opinion. And tag questions are short questions consisting of an auxiliary, like don't or isn't, and a pronoun like it or you added to the end of a statement, like, for example, I hate it when it rains all day, don't you? So, as for men, they tend to use more assertive forms and strong language, like, for example, it's too damn and cold in here. So, other researchers have also pointed to preference among women, especially in same gender groups, so with other women, for indirect speech acts like, could I see that photo, rather than direct speech acts like, give me that photo, heard more often from men in same gender groups. So speaking of conversation in same gender groups, now we're discussing gender interaction. So actually many of the features already identified in women's speech, like the tag questions, for example, and hedging and so on, facilitate the exchange of turns, allowing others to speak with the effect that interaction becomes a shared activity. However, interaction among men appears to be organized in a more hierarchical way, with the right to speak or having the floor being treated as the goal. So it seems that men generally take longer turns at speaking, and in many social contexts, like for example religious events, may be the only ones allowed to talk. So one effect of these different styles is that certain features become very salient in cross-gender interactions. For example, in same-gender discussions, there is little difference in the number of times speakers interrupt each other. However, in cross-gender interactions, men are much more likely to interrupt women, with 96% of interruptions made by men in one study involving American students. So, in same-gender conversations, women produce more back channels as indications of listening and paying attention. So actually, the term back channels refers to the use of words like yeah or really or sounds like oh by listeners while someone else is speaking. So men not only produce fewer back channels, but they appear to treat them when produced by others as indicators of agreement. In cross-gender interaction, the absence of back channels from men tends to make women think that men are not paying attention to them, while the more frequent production of back channels by women leads men to think that the women are agreeing with what they are saying. What we have to consider is that these different interactional styles serve to add conversations between men and women to the list of areas of cross-cultural communications. It's better for us to be prepared to try to understand the impact of the cultures we inherit, and through the creativity with language that we are also given, we can find new ways of articulating those cultures before we pass them on. This brings me to the end of this presentation. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day. Bye.